I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and we were doing all right. As the NBA playoffs continue, our Thursday pod, we went 3-2 against the spread. We're still at 25-17 against the spread in the NBA playoffs / play-in, and we're rolling with 37 wins, 21 losses, and a push against the spread since we've been doing NBA picks on this pod. We start in the West. There are a trio of closeout games, all closed out on the road. We have the Suns, who won and covered 115-109. They won that series 3-2. Devin Booker played, which obviously would have put a wrench into some of the point spreads there. He had 13 points. Chris Paul with the point god type performance, going 14 for 14 from the floor, 33 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds, lots of tears. There's like crying and all that going on post game with Willie Green and all that. Emotional scenes there.
Yeah.
Zion, not emotional at all. Still not playing. Anyways, story for another day. Suns win and move on to play the Mavs. And the Mavs, who won and covered their Game 6 closeout game in Utah, they win at 3-2. Bogdanovich had a 3 at the end to win the game, and he missed. And now it's probably the end of Utah as we know it. Mavs and Suns, Game 1, set to tip Monday night. Suns favored by 5.5 points for Game 1. I'm going to say this, Matt. I'm going to go with the Suns here. I think it's a bad matchup for the Mavs, and the playoffs, as we know, comes all the way down to matchups. I think a lot of the open threes that the Mavs were able to concoct against the Utah Jazz, they will not be able to get against a better, more agile defensive team like the Phoenix Suns. The matchups for Luka, whether it's Jay Crowder, whether it's Bridges, whether it's Cam Johnson off the bench, like they got a lot of long athletic wings to throw at Luka. And the Mavs, I don't know if they're used to yet, they can meld the playing styles of how well they did without Luka, with like Jalen Brunson playing point guard and all that fun stuff, and then just Luka being Luka. Can they meld those two things? They struggled to do that against Utah. It got dicey against Utah, and we know Utah isn't good. The Suns, I feel like the Suns are pretty good. And I mean, if you're telling me Booker's there, I'm not expecting him to be a hundo P, but he's there. So, yeah, Game 1, I'm interested to see how it plays out for sure, but give me the 5.5 points for the Suns. And overall, give me the Suns in 6 in this series.
Okay, yeah, I'm kind of with you here, man. Like this Suns team, yeah, obviously when Devin Booker goes out, like it gets a little bit sketchy, and then he comes back, and you mentioned the point spread sort of flipping around there. They end up closing 3.5, I think, 3.5 point favorites in that game. That was the one game of those trio of Game 6s I thought that the home team was going to actually force that Game 7. Of course, didn't know that Booker would play, and actually had a couple of key baskets there in that game. And so as he comes back, you know, it's funny, the scheduling, right? Because these closeout games all by and large happen on Thursday, with the one exception being Friday, and Memphis closing out Minnesota in Minnesota. And then of course they had to turn around and go back home and play the Warriors yesterday, which is obviously a game and series that we're going to get to here. But Phoenix, meanwhile, has gotten a couple extra days here, especially relative to the Memphis Grizzlies, right? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then obviously a full day here coming up today. And you go, okay, like that's only going to help Devin Booker, who's, by the way, like his injury was only like a week-long type of a thing, right? So he gets injured and then needs a week to, get back in it. So how bad could it have possibly been, right? And so if it only takes a week or so to get healthy, getting 4 more days, right? That's almost, it's half of a week. So I feel like he is going to be really healthy and ready to go for this series. Now, again, could that pop up at any given time? Yeah, but you know what? A lot of people's hamstrings could pop up at any given time, right? Especially when it comes to the NBA playoffs so far. So I look at this and I go, I laugh when you're talking about like, the Dallas, they beat the Jazz, because it's, you feel really good about Dallas sort of in theory, right? Where it's like, we didn't think anything of them, most of us, I suppose, even though again, I'm still kicking myself for not just planting my flag on the Mavericks. And then they beat the Jazz in part without Luka, and then Luka comes back and he looks awesome. And you go like, oh yeah, this Dallas team, like they might be a contender, but you're right. Like it has to come back to the idea that like, it was just the Jazz who are just throwing each other under the bus hand over fist. And right, everybody's just decided like Donovan Mitchell's got to go, and Rudy Gobert is like threatening to not block shots because his team is so bad on ball defense. It's like, if you guys are going to let guys go by, I'm just going to let them get buckets because I don't feel, as a matter of protest out there. And so like, okay, like I can't. And by the way, like these games are really close that the Mavericks won, right? Especially when Luka came back. Obviously, the one blowout game back in Dallas, but the road games in Utah. And so I just go like, I realize the regular season in a lot of cases like doesn't mean all that much, but the regular season has to mean something as far as like continuity and chemistry and all of that stuff. That, by the way, the Suns team went to the finals last year, right? This isn't just a one-year type deal. But the point is like, this is not the Jazz, like not willing to talk to each other, not willing to have any communication on or off the court. And so I look at this and I go like, Phoenix -5.5, like at home, like that does feel kind of short, right? Like this feels like one that probably should be closer to 7.5, and who knows by game time whether that'll be the case, right? And like I just don't see the Mavericks as a contender all of a sudden, right? There was a pretty obvious dividing line when the playoffs started between the Suns, Mavs, Memphis Grizzlies and Warriors, and then the Mavs, and then just obviously kind of everybody else below that. I mean, there wasn't really anything in the sleeper department when it came to the West. And so I'm looking at this right now as maybe not betting this series price, because the series price -290, like that's a pretty healthy price for going against a team that, by the way, might have the best player in the series, right? Depending on how impactful Luka Doncic actually is, which I imagine is going to be considerable. I'm looking at this as more of a long-term thing. I think this is a little bit of a hiccup that the Suns had against the Pelicans isn't indicative of their long-term chances. And what's happened in the marketplace is that the Suns have actually gone up and lengthened in price to win the title. They came into this playoffs in the +200s, right? Between +250 and +290. They're +350 right now. And they've already gotten rid of one of the steps, right? Like we talked about how there's like, when we get into the first round, there's a non-zero chance of them losing. Well, they got a little bit of a scare there in games, in a 6-game series, and their price actually went up. And I'm like, okay, like it has to come down. There are less teams. By the way, if you look around at some of the competition league-wide for the title, you've got a compromised Miami Heat team. You've got a compromised Sixers team, who's a big-time underdog in their second round. The Nets that were taking up all of this win probability, right? We talked about all season long about how absurd it was, what their odds were. That was taking a large piece of the pie when it comes to futures title win probability. That's disappeared. Where has that gone, right? Who has that gone to? Now, of course, we'll talk about Milwaukee, and that's obvious. Like they're clearly a contender. The Warriors, sure. But like, why has there some of that slice of the pie, if you will, been cut down from the Suns? That doesn't make much sense to me. So I think right now, this is a really good spot to sort of buy low in as weird as that is to say, on the Suns -5.5 tonight, but certainly grab some futures here on the Suns to win the title at +350, unless the Mavs knock them off in one of these two games, which, by the way, certainly possible. It's not going to get any better, right? It's not going to get any better than +350. But honestly, I would have told you it's not going to get any better than +300 before the playoffs started, and it has. So a little bit surprising there, but I think this is time to get in on the on the Suns, knowing that they're a pretty good matchup for the Warriors in the next round, if that ends up being the case. And certainly a good matchup, I think, against the Memphis Grizzlies in the next round. So, yeah, the big hurdle, I shouldn't say the big hurdle, but like the big scare, if you will, I think has already happened when it comes to a value standpoint. I think the Suns +350 to win the title. Now is the time to get in on that, because I think by the time we get to the championship and they're in the finals, maybe as the favorite, +350 is going to be looking awfully nice.
No, for sure. I totally get where you're coming from there.